everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Gary Parker. Today we have episode 413 for January 27th, 2025. And happy Data Privacy Week, everybody. This is something that happens every January around this time. It used to be Data Privacy Day. Somewhere along the line, it got expanded to Data Privacy Week. Not really sure when or why that happened. But in honor of that, I update a special data privacy checklist blog posting that I do every year. Actually, I have a really short blog entry that just says, hey, I've updated this other thing, go check it out, and it has a few other links in it. But that is a good starting point because it also links to some other things you might want to check out. I've got a long list of other resources on my website that it points to, as well as the New Year's resolutions that I put out for this year, some ideas for you to put on your to-do list. So there is a link in the show notes. Check that out. That will take you to that article and then take you on to those other lists. So the annual listener survey is closed. Thank you to everyone who replied and gave me your opinions and feedback. I very much appreciate that. I've read some of them. I haven't read them all yet, but I will. I absolutely will. And by the time you hear this, I should have notified all the winners of my book. So if you turned in your response and gave me an email address, and I picked your email address out of the hat, you will have won a copy of my book. So be sure to check your spam folder in case it went there. But I will, probably by the time you have heard this, will have notified all the winners. Okay, so let's get to the news. A lot of stuff to talk about today, some of it having to do with the new administration. They're making a lot of changes. And again, this isn't a partisan or political thing. This is just what's happening. We're going to talk a little bit about TikTok and where things stand with that. The new administration fired a bunch of cybersecurity people, which doesn't make any sense to me. Apple's doing it again. Like everybody else, unfortunately, they've got some new AI features coming out, and on the next big revision of the operating system for both your phone and your Mac, you will be opted in automatically. I will tell you how to fix that. I've got another article about some random other Apple things. There was supposedly the USB-C port on the iPhone was hacked. Also, there's a pretty tricky phishing scam going on. I alluded to it last week. I'll talk a little bit more about that this week. PowerSchool got hacked. This is a service used by teachers and students. That's not a good thing. There's a new AI tool that I've actually speculated about on this show before, and now it has become a reality that's kind of scary for locating where photos were taken using AI. Subarus were vulnerable to attack. This has been fixed, so don't worry about that, at least this particular flaw. But it's still a very interesting story that I want to cover. A research group found a whole bunch of flaws in the cellular network system that could allow the cellular networks to be taken down. Texas has sued Allstate insurance company over collecting driver data. And related to that, GM has been banned by the FTC from sharing driving and location data with insurance companies. Consumer Reports has an article about fitness machines like exercise bikes and how a lot of these things know an awful lot about you and collect a lot of your data and share it. And finally, one little bit of good news this week. We have had a court victory with the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, or FISA, the very controversial Section 702. We have had a court victory on that, and I'll explain that. And then for the tip of the week, I'll explain why you really need to be treating browser extensions just like applications. All right, lots to talk about. Let's get to it. All right, first off, let's get this whole TikTok thing out of the way. This is an article from The Verge. President Donald Trump has issued an executive order telling the Department of Justice to not enforce a rule that demands TikTok spin off from its Chinese parent company, ByteDance, or face a ban. The order, issued on Trump's first day in office, is meant to effectively extend the deadline established by the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act for ByteDance to sell its stake by undercutting penalties on American companies like Apple and Google working with TikTok. It directs the Attorney General, quote, not to take any action to enforce the act for a period of 75 days from today, which was last Monday, to allow my administration an opportunity to determine the appropriate course forward in an orderly way, unquote. The AG is supposed to, quote, issue a letter to each provider stating that there has been no violation of the statute and there is no liability for any conduct that occurred, unquote. The order furthermore instructs the Department of Justice to, quote, take no action to enforce the act or impose any penalties against any entity for any noncompliance with the act, unquote, and they should be barred from doing so for, quote, for any conduct that occurred during the above specified period or any period prior to the issuance of this order, including the period of time from January 19th, 2025 to the signing of this order, unquote, because there was, a day between the time this took effect and the time that Trump took office. Trump, who issued an executive order banning TikTok during his first term in 2020, is now trying to circumvent a bipartisan law that took effect January 19th. He posted on Truth Social before taking office that he was asking companies to keep working with TikTok, a move that could mean risking hundreds of billions of dollars in fines if Trump's assurances don't stand up in court. TikTok briefly went down on Sunday, but quickly came back online, though it was removed from Apple's and Google's app stores and has not come back. And by the way, I just checked the Apple App Store and it's still not there. Though if you already have the app, you're fine. It's not going to get deleted from your phone, at least not so far. It's unclear whether Trump can legally pause the TikTok ban. The law allowed for a 90-day extension if ByteDance announced a sale to a non-foreign adversary-based company before the deadline. But not only has no such sale been announced, it's also legally ambiguous whether the extension can be used after the 19th. Trump, in any case, isn't so far using the deadline. He's just attempting to override the law. Despite that reassurance, it may not be enough to convince service providers covered by the law to reinstate TikTok. As many legal experts have pointed out, those companies could face up to about $850 billion in potential penalties, that's billion, for violating the law, which was passed by a bipartisan Congress, signed by former President Joe Biden, and upheld by the entire Supreme Court. The government could act on any potential violation even 5 years after it happens, and an executive order doesn't change that, though it might help give the companies a slightly better due process defense to fight it. Companies might still not risk litigation over such a large potential fine, though they may also be wary of raising Trump's ire by refusing to work with TikTok. Trump also declared on Sunday that the U.S. government could own 50% of TikTok through an unexplained joint venture with a private company. It remains unclear how this would work. So again, TikTok has been pulled from the app stores. As far as I can tell, it's gone from Apple. I haven't checked Google. But I will say that when I went to search for, TikTok in the Apple App Store to see if it was still there, it didn't show up because it wasn't there. But what I did get instead was a whole bunch of other suggestions like Instagram, Snapchat, and Facebook, which should make us realize who really stands to gain from this ban. I'm sure that Mark Zuckerberg was extremely happy that all of this banning stuff has gone on. He and his company really stand to benefit from this ban, as well as I would think Elon Musk and Twitter, or X. But if you already have the app on your phone, you should be able to use TikTok as usual. You can always get to it on the web as well. That is still working in there. And I'm not really sure if the ban would affect web access. I wasn't ever clear on that. It's just a mess. It's just a complete mess. And I've been saying for a long time that, yes, I understand some of the concerns with TikTok, but 90% or 95% of the concerns that we have with TikTok, we also should be having with all the other social media apps. The only difference with TikTok is that it is owned by a company that resides in China, and there are laws in China which would require that company to do certain things which would be potentially detrimental to us in terms of gathering data. But the Chinese Communist Party does not need TikTok to gather information about us or spread propaganda. There's plenty of other ways to do that, including using all the other apps that are more than happy to take money and use algorithms to push, that kind of crap. Anyway, before I give up on this, I do want to give a quick shout out to StickTalk, and that's StickTock.com, which was created by Privacy Safe. They're creating some fun online tools for security and privacy. And Privacy Safe is a project by a friend of the show, Sean O'Brien, so I'll probably have more to say about that project in the future. And the point of StickTalk is basically to allow you to access TikTok videos without all the tracking and stuff. If you're interested, there's a link in the show notes, or just go to sticktalk.com. As for TikTok itself, I have no idea where this is going to end up. The only really valuable thing about TikTok, other than its user base, that any company who would ever think about buying them would want to have is the algorithm. The algorithm is everything, and China has made it very clear they will not allow ByteDance to give away that algorithm in any sale whatsoever, which seriously undercuts the value of buying TikTok. I mean, basically all you would be doing is buying the user base, which, that definitely has value, but If the app becomes horrible and everybody leaves it, then what would be the point? So anyway, I don't know what's going to happen to TikTok, but I will, I guess, keep you posted. All right, next up, this is from TechCrunch. And the incoming Trump administration is on a firing spree. They are getting rid of a lot of people in government. And I don't know. Again, this sounds partisan, but it really looks like what they're doing is they're purging a lot of people that are part of the quote unquote deep state that they believe are somehow partisan and political, and basically replacing them with other people who are probably partisan and political, just in a different way. And frankly, most of the career politicians at these places that they're getting rid of are almost explicitly nonpartisan. I don't know. It's a mess, and I don't think it's going to end well. But let's start with this article from TechCrunch. On Tuesday, a day after Donald Trump's inauguration as the new U.S. president, the Department of Homeland Security told members of several advisory committees that they were effectively fired. Among the committees impacted is the Cybersecurity Review Board, or CSRB, according to sources familiar with the board who spoke to TechCrunch, as well as reporting by other news outlets. The CSRB was made up of both private sector and government cybersecurity experts. One person familiar with the CSRB who received the letter informing them that their membership in the CSRB has been terminated criticized the decision. And this person asked to be anonymous, so anyway, but the quote is, "Shutting down all DHS advisory boards without consideration of the impact was horribly short-sighted. Stopping the CSRB review when China has ongoing cyber attacks into our critical infrastructure is a dangerous blunder. We need to learn from Salt Typhoon and protect ourselves better. The fact that this isn't a priority for Trump is telling. You can't stop what you don't understand, and the CSRB was arming us with understanding," unquote. The person was referring to the CSRB's reviews of the devastating recent breaches at several telecoms in the U.S. allegedly carried out by Chinese government hackers. CISA spokesperson Valerie Mongello referred TechCrunch's request for comment to DHS. In response to a request for comment, DHS provided a comment from an unnamed DHS senior official. And this is what the statement said, quote, "Effective immediately, the Department of Homeland Security will no longer tolerate any advisory committee which push agendas that attempt to undermine its national security mission, the president's agenda, or constitutional rights of Americans. In alignment with the Department of Homeland Security's commitment to eliminating the misuse of resources and ensuring that DHS activities prioritize our national security, I am directing the termination of all current memberships on advisory committees within DHS effective immediately," unquote. Another person familiar with the matter pointed out that, quote, "It's interesting that the rationale is the misuse of resources because all advisory board members get an excitingly rich salary of $0, unquote. Katie Massaris, a cybersecurity expert with more than 2 decades of experience, who I met at ShmooCon, by the way, and I'm hoping to interview at some point soon, and a former member of the CSRB, told TechCrunch that, quote, "The people who serve as government advisors should be judged by skills and merit, not by political affiliation. I'm hopeful that these critical advisory board vacancies will be filled with the most qualified people without delay," unquote. The CSRB investigated the breach of U.S. government email systems provided by Microsoft, also allegedly carried out by Chinese government hackers. In March of last year, the committee published a report on the incident, which was widely lauded in the cybersecurity community. Other DHS advisory committee members that are reportedly impacted by DHS's decision are those dedicated to artificial intelligence, telecommunications, science and technology, and emergency preparedness. Okay, so I don't know what to say about this other than this is just dumb. This is absolutely stupid. These people have a lot of important information. They were already working on things that were extremely important for our security as a nation. And to just blanket fire them because you think they might be political or because they were appointed by your political rival is just, well, it's just stupid. I'm sorry. This is going to come back to bite us. Hopefully they will somehow reverse this and bring a lot of these people back. What I'm really worried about, honestly, with this administration, and again, I don't consider this a partisan thing. The facts are that a lot of the people being appointed in these administrations are just bulk firing career officials and people with a lot of knowledge from these things just because they're somehow associated with the previous administration. That is really not smart. And I'm really worried about brain drain here. I'm afraid that we're going to lose a crap ton of experience and knowledge that is crucial for these jobs. So I guess we're going to find out what happens. All right, so next up, this is an article from Mac Rumors, and it's about Apple Intelligence coming to iOS 18.3 and macOS 15.3, which is both coming up very soon. Like it might even happen this week. So if you don't like AI being on by default, listen up. When installing macOS Sequoia 15.3, iOS 18.3, or iPadOS 18.3, Apple Intelligence will be turned on automatically on compatible devices, Apple says in the developer release notes for the updates. And this is a quote from there. It says, for users new or upgrading to iOS 18.3, Apple Intelligence will be enabled automatically during iPhone onboarding. Users will have access to Apple Intelligence features after setting up their devices. To disable Apple Intelligence, users will need to navigate to the Apple Intelligence and Siri settings pane and turn off the Apple Intelligence toggle. This will disable Apple Intelligence features on their device. And back to the article, with macOS Sequoia 15.1, macOS Sequoia 15.2, iOS 18.1, and iOS 18.2, Apple Intelligence was opt-in rather than opt-out, and users who wanted the feature needed to turn it on in the Settings app. Going forward, it will be enabled by default, and Mac, iPhone, and iPad users who do not want to use the feature will need to turn it off. Apple provided developers and public beta testers with release candidate versions of iOS 18.3, iPadOS 18.3, and macOS Sequoia 15.3 today, which was last week, which means the software updates will see a release in the near future. We are expecting the updates to launch to the public next week, which is this week. All right, so we talked about this last week. First and foremost, any new feature or updated existing feature that could send private information off the device for processing should never be turned on by default. I'm sorry. I mean, I know, look, I said it last time too. I think Apple's done a phenomenal job of keeping this stuff private. Their cloud compute, their private cloud compute thing that they built is freaking amazing. But still, in this situation, it's gotten so touchy, and I think the default just should be for anybody doing any of these features that could require off-board processing of personal data, that you need to give the person a heads up that it's coming and let them opt in, not make them opt out. Now, real quick, I just need to say, your devices, kind of by definition, do a lot of talking to the internet behind the scenes without you doing anything. A lot of these things are, waiting for software updates and checking to make sure that everything is up to date. There's a lot of cloud syncing that is automatically built into a lot of our devices. Our contacts, our notes, our reminders, our calendars, emails, all these things are synchronized through the cloud between our devices. This is different than that. Like most of those synchronization features, if done properly, are still end-to-end encrypted. Like when Apple does those things, Apple doesn't get to see your data. If you set up advanced data protection, which I think all of us should do, if you do that, most of your personal data that is synchronized between your devices through Apple's cloud services are not available to them. And Apple also, to their credit, tries to do as much on-device processing as is humanly possible. They've put a lot of beefy computer parts in our devices that could do a lot of heavy-duty processing, but there's still going to be times when to do, some feature that Apple thinks is super cool, that they're gonna need more processing power than exists on your iPhone or your iPad or even on your computer. And so at that point, they will, at their own discretion, go off board, go into the cloud to Apple's private compute to process that data. And again, Apple has gone to extreme lengths to not know anything about the data that you send it. I am duly impressed with the way that works. But as a pure matter of personal privacy rights, they shouldn't be doing that without your permission. Or a compromise that I think would be interesting, which would have the same end result, is give you the option to not go off board without permission. I think it's personally okay if they turn on Apple Intelligence for anything that only works on the device, that doesn't require your data to leave the device. I personally think that would be okay to turn on by default. So the toggle should be whether or not your device will ever send personal data to the cloud. That should be opt-in and not opt-out. One more little caveat I'm going to say here is that Apple is working with ChatGPT, and there's a ChatGPT app on your phone and on your Mac now that didn't used to be there. You can use that, I believe, if you don't sign into an OpenAI account, which is who owns ChatGPT. If you don't actually sign into the account, you will get limited, semi-private access to using ChatGPT through those apps. However, If you sign into your account, then you are now using your ChatGPT account, and those privacy policies now apply, not Apple's. And it's even worse when we start talking about other AI stuff. Like just this morning, I was reading in a whole thread on social media, and I'll probably have to come back to this in a future news story, about how Microsoft is basically shoving Copilot, which is their AI assistant, down everybody's throat. If you've got Microsoft Office installed, for example, it sounded like there was no way to turn it off, which is totally wrong. I mean, if opting everybody into something without their permission was bad, making it something you cannot disable is much worse. And I think that's personally class action lawsuit territory, but we'll see what happens there. Anyway, it's getting really bad. Everybody's putting AI into everything, and they're turning it on by default, which means that your personal data is almost certainly going up to the cloud for processing. So are they protecting that data? You know, as if history is any guide, somebody's not doing that properly. And second, they're probably finding some way to try to monetize your data, or at least use it to train future AI models, and probably without asking your permission explicitly, or hiding it in something else that makes it too easy to say yes to and not understanding what you're saying yes to. It is a real problem. These new AI features are really cool. They can do some amazing and powerful things. There's also a whole lot of hype about things that they really can't do that well yet, and they're not going to take over the planet. But at the end of the day, what we're talking about here is your rights to not share your personal information without proper notice and consent. And I've said before how notice and consent is broken. This is another case where it's not working very well. But that should always be your right to opt in with full understanding of what that means, and not having to try to find some hidden setting somewhere and figure out how to turn it off. All right, next up, here's an article from 9to5Mac, and it actually covers 3 different stories. So we've got a 3-in-1 here. Okay, first up, there's a security vulnerability in iPhone's USB-C port. Security researcher Thomas Roth discovered a vulnerability in the USB-C controller chip first introduced into Apple's supply chain in 2023. In principle, it could be used to compromise an iPhone, as cybersecurity news reports. And this is a quote from them. Security researchers have successfully hacked Apple's proprietary ACE3 USB-C controller. This chip, introduced with the iPhone 15 and iPhone 15 Pro, represents a significant leap in USB-C technology, handling power delivery and acting as a sophisticated microcontroller with access to critical internal systems. Roth's team was able to gain code execution on the ACE3 chip by carefully measuring electromagnetic signals during the chip's startup process. They identified the precise moment when firmware validation occurred. Using electromagnetic fault injection at this critical juncture, they successfully bypassed the validation checks and booted a modified firmware patch into the chip's CPU. Okay, back to the article. In theory, this could give an attacker complete control over an iPhone. However, it would require physical access to the device and is exceedingly difficult to pull off. Macworld reports that Apple concluded it wasn't a realistic threat after examining the method used, and Roth, who was the initial researcher, agreed. So let me just pause briefly. This happens a lot in some of these cybersecurity vulnerabilities. I saw this everywhere. iPhones are vulnerable. USB-C hacked. Light your hair on fire. The sky is falling. You know, I see lots of those kind of things. It turns out in practical cases that this is very difficult to actually exploit. So where this probably comes into play is for state actors. So, if the Customs and Border Protection Agency at the border asks you to hand over your iPhone and walks into the back room and then comes back 10 minutes later and hands it to you, I would assume that they somehow got into that device and maybe made a copy of all the data, or perhaps even was able to implant malware if they're really, getting up to no good. Certainly, I would, worry about this if I was traveling into other foreign places where that might be a problem. Or if you're a journalist or an activist, especially if you're in a repressive regime, these sorts of things can become a problem because the people who could find a way potentially to exploit this would be, nation state actors. And they might be able to confiscate your device, in which case they would have physical access to your phone and they could, get into this stuff. So there's that. But for regular everyday people like you and I, this is apparently something that would be very hard for anybody else to pull off, and we don't really need to be worried about it. All right, this article goes on. Here's the next one. SMS and iMessages are commonly used by scammers to send links intended to carry out phishing attacks and to attempt to install malware in iPhones. To protect against this, if you receive an iMessage from someone who is not in your contacts and with whom you've never exchanged messages, your iPhone automatically disables any links in the message. They appear as plain text and cannot be tapped. However, scammers have found a way around this. If they can convince you to reply to the message, even with a stop command intended to instruct a legitimate sender not to message you again, then this protection is disabled. Bleeping Computer says the fact that you have messaged them, even with a one-character reply, means the iPhone considers them legitimate and unblocks their links. Apple told Bleeping Computer that if a user replies to that message or adds a sender to their contact list, the links will be enabled. Over the past couple months, Bleeping Computer has seen a surge in smishing, which is SMS phishing, attacks that attempt to trick users into replying to a text so that the links are enabled again. The site showed examples of fake texts claiming to be from USPS and a toll road company, each asking the recipient to reply with Y or yes. This would activate the links. It's common enough that I was able to find the above example, and there was a picture in the article, to photograph simply by looking in my deleted messages folder. So how do you protect yourself? Never tap or click a link received in an email or other message unless you are expecting it. Best practice is to only ever use your own bookmarks or type URLs manually, and only to do the latter if you have good reason to think the message is genuine. When in doubt, call or message the company using known contact details to verify. So yes, that is just common standard practice for being secure when you're getting links from anywhere, from any source that you weren't explicitly asking for. That could be text messages, emails, whatever. So the trick here, and I think the most interesting part of this article, is Apple has done something good. Again, basically, if you've never interacted with somebody before and you get a text from them out of the blue that has a link in it, Apple does not activate that link. It just looks like text. You can't click on it and then go to a website, which is good because more than likely that link is a scam, or worse yet, is going to try to infect your phone with malware. So this is a protection that Apple gives you, which is great. But there's a loophole for this, and the loophole is if you have the person who sent you that text message in your contact list, or if you ever interact with them at all, including after the fact, then any of the messages that they have sent you and the links contained in those messages will now become regular live links. They will be blue and underlined. So what the scammers are doing to trick you into doing this is they're giving you some reason to reply to the message, like, hey, we've got a problem with your USPS delivery on this thing. Click this link to figure it out, except that link isn't clickable. And then below that, they say, to activate the link, just reply with Y to this message, and the link will become activated, and then you can click on it, which is true. That is the workaround. That is because you've now interacted with this person who sent you a message. They're trusted, essentially, which I think Apple's going to have to fix that. And I'm not sure what the solution to that is going to be, but it seems like that is definitely a loophole. But anyway, it's clever, right? This is what the bad guys are doing to get you to bypass this protection that Apple has built into their messages program. So again, just a cat and mouse game. You know, companies try to put in protections for us, and then the bad guys figure out clever ways to work around them. So another week, another data breach. This one is with PowerSchool, and this is an article from TechRadar. And this actually is a follow-up article that already assumes that you know that the fact that they've been hacked. So, spoiler alert, PowerSchool, which is a company that does online educational stuff for students and teachers, has been hacked. There has been a massive data breach from PowerSchool. So given that, here's what this article says. The PowerSchool hack seems to have been much worse than originally believed, as new reports now claim that more than 62 million students and 9 million teachers were actually affected by the attack. In late December 2024, an unidentified threat actor used stolen credentials to access its PowerSchool student information system platform. From there, they were able to use the Export Data Manager customer support tool to exfiltrate students' and teachers' database tables to a CSV file, or comma-separated value file, which was then stolen. The information grabbed in this attack included names and postal addresses, and in some districts, the threat actors also obtained social security numbers, personal identifiable information, medical information, and grades. It has since been reported the attackers stole the personal data of 62.4 million students and 9.5 million teachers, citing both the attacker and multiple other sources. In total, it was said, 6,505 school districts in the U.S., Canada, and other countries were affected. The numbers are allegedly coming from the extortion demands sent to the breached company. Toronto's District School Board, Peel District School Board, and Dallas Independent School District seem to be the most impacted. PowerSchool did not want to comment on the new findings, it was said, especially since its investigation is still ongoing. However, the company did tell the publication that the type of exposed data varies per district. This is because school districts decide what information they will store in this Student Information System database based on district or state policy requirements. And then a quote coming through Bleepy Computer from the company says, quote, "For this reason, it is expected that less than a quarter of impacted students had their Social Security numbers exposed in the breach. We care deeply about the students, teachers, and families we serve and are wholeheartedly committed to supporting them. PowerSchool will be offering 2 years of complimentary identity protection services and 2 years of complimentary credit monitoring services for all applicable students and educators whose information was involved," unquote. Okay, so yet another data breach, and pretty much the same takeaways. But I gotta say that as I read this, and certainly the quote from the company, this whole credit monitoring stuff, honestly, to me, has become the whole thoughts and prayers response for data breaches. It's just not enough. I mean, yeah, fine, thanks, that's great. So it's almost literally the least you could do, but it doesn't solve the problem. It also reminded me of a classic hacker saying, which I've seen on stickers, that says, "We take your security and privacy seriously," except there's a comma after the privacy. So the way it actually should be read is, "We take your security and privacy seriously." And so obviously the moral to this whole thing, as always, is don't collect it if you can't protect it. We've got to treat data like this as toxic sludge that we minimize as much as possible, get rid of as soon as we can, and if possible, don't collect it in the first place. And if you do collect it and you do keep it around, it must be highly, highly protected with multiple safeguards. So in this data breach, it appears that the threat actor got a hold of somebody's credentials somehow and then was able to access this system and get all this data. Now, they probably shouldn't have been able to get all this data, right? It should have been compartmentalized. There should have been rate limiting. There's plenty of things we could do that would even protect somebody with administrator level access from being able to get this much information. We still just suck at security. And some of the other articles we're about to hear will drive that home as well. All right, next up, another great story from 404 Media. And it's about an AI tool that I have at least speculated in the past that was certainly going to be happening, and it is now here. And apparently it works creepily well. And this is about a tool that is able to figure out the location of an image based on what's going on in the background. So this is a bit of a longer article, but there's some good stuff in here. A powerful AI tool can predict with high accuracy the location of photos based on features inside the image itself, such as vegetation, architecture, and the distance between buildings, in seconds, with the company now marketing the tool to law enforcement officers and government agencies. Called GeoSpy, made by a firm called Greylark Technologies out of Boston, the tool has also been used for months by members of the public, with many making videos marveling at the technology, and some asking for help with stalking specific women. The company's founder has aggressively pushed back against such requests, and GeoSpy closed off public access to the tool after 404 Media contacted him for comment. Based on 404 Media's own tests and conversations with other people who have used it and investors, GeoSpy could radically change what information can be learned from photos posted online, and by whom. Law enforcement officers with very little necessary training, private threat intelligence companies, and stalkers could, and in some cases already are, using this technology. Dedicated open source intelligence, or OSINT professionals, can of course do this too, but the training and skill set necessary can take years to build up. GeoSpy allows essentially anyone to do it. And this is a quote from Daniel Heinen, the founder of Greylark and GeoSpy. who wrote this in a message on Discord on their GeoSpy community. He said, quote, "We are working on something for law enforcement, but it's," and then there's a little emoji with a smiley face with a zippered lips, meaning it's secret or whatever. GeoSpy has been trained on millions of images from around the world according to marketing material available online. From that, the tool is able to recognize, quote, "distinct geographical markers such as architectural styles, soil characteristics, and their spatial relationships," unquote. That marketing material says GeoSpy has strong coverage in the United States, but that it also maintains global capabilities for location identification. 404 Media created a free account on GeoSpy earlier this month. One of 404 Media's tests was an image of a man harassing a woman in a Waymo. And this, I guess, was a news story they covered a while back where this guy stood in front of this lady's Waymo car. GeoSpy correctly geolocated the photo. It almost sounds like it's an AI chatbot kind of a thing because the tool responded with text. And the tool said, quote, "The Soma Park Inn sign is visible in the video, which is located in San Francisco. The architecture of the buildings and the street signs also point to San Francisco," unquote. In another test, GeoSpy identified the location as likely being in New York City. The target image was the grainy CCTV footage of the moment the United Healthcare assassin murdered company CEO Brian Thompson. And again, the tool said, quote, "The image appears to be from a security camera or traffic camera in New York City. The vehicle and street layout are consistent with the city's urban environment," unquote. GeoSpy runs an associated Discord server where Heinen gives updates on the product and chats with its users. In there, he has uploaded other examples of GeoSpy in action. And this is a quote that goes with a screenshot that this Heinen guy posted. It says, quote, "The photo shows a narrow street with cobblestones and brick buildings, which is typical of the Beacon Hill neighborhood in Boston," unquote. And another example included in a YouTube video posted last year, Heinen used a photo of some trees near a road. GeoSpy narrows that area down to Boston too, based on the sort of vegetation in the photo. The system wasn't fully accurate, but it, quote, "goes from the entire world down to a few kilometer search area," unquote, Heinen says in the video. In that same YouTube video, Heinen explained that his team was building a tool that can automatically extract information from scraped photos, and particularly profile pictures. But all of these photos had their metadata removed. When you upload an image to many social media sites, they strip the file's original metadata, which ordinarily could include GPS coordinates or other useful information. Heinen says the team came across a research study that instead talked about finding the location of photos based on features inside the image itself. The team then built GeoSpy as a demo to show, quote, "based on this research, look what we can do," unquote. He added that the team didn't think that many people would use it, but interest grew from all over the world. That doesn't shock me. I don't know why it should shock them. In a May Discord message, Heinen said he quit his day job as an AI research engineer to work on GeoSpy full-time. Heinen says people have used GeoSpy as a part of fraud detection for apartment listings that weren't in the claimed city, to police investigating child abuse material. One example in the video geolocates a protest to within a few blocks in Mexico City. Another use case Heinen mentioned is a security team scouring the internet for threats against an office. Heinen says the team could set up a geofence around a particular location and pull up any results included in that area. He also brings up, quote-unquote, winning wars by being able to predict the movement of tanks by geolocating photos of them. Now, this is a quote from Cooper Quinton, a really nice guy from EFF, who runs their tech trivia contest at DEF CON. Anyway, Cooper's also a highly technical research technologist at EFF. And Coop says, quote, "Geolocating photos based on open source clues such as buildings in the background, shadows, and other minute details has long been a knowledge technique in the open source intelligence community. But GeoSpy, providing the service to law enforcement at scale, could present a serious threat to the public. It's one thing if police are using this against a photo that is a place of evidence in an investigation of a serious crime. It's totally different to use it en masse to build a geolocation database and to gather intelligence on people not engaged in suspected criminal activity. And if the results from GeoSpy are inaccurate, I'm concerned this could lead to wasted time for law enforcement, fear and confusion for civilians, and wrongful arrests based on faulty information. It is no longer enough to remove EXIF metadata, which is something I've talked about on this show before. That's the metadata in photos that often has shutter speed and lighting stuff, but also now GPS. It's not enough to remove EXIF metadata from your photos to hide their location, and this should serve as a reminder for people who are at heightened risk that they need to start including geolocation and services such as GeoSpy in their threat model, unquote. When one user asked if GeoSpy could add imagery for inside of vehicles or hotel rooms, or the ability to upload their own data, Heinen said GeoSpy had the ability, but that it came with potential problems. When asked what those might be, Heinen replied, quote, "Stalking. Mostly that," unquote. A day after 404 Media contacted Heinen for comment, GeoSpy shut off access to the free publicly accessible version of the tool. Now users have to request access, which is, quote, "available exclusively to qualified law enforcement agencies, enterprise users, and government entities," unquote. Its website now reads. Heinen did not respond to requests for comment. And then one final note in the article, that law enforcement version of GeoSpy is more powerful than what was publicly available according to Heinen's Discord posts. He said, quote, "geospy.ai is a demo. The real work is in the law enforcement models," unquote. Okay, so again, this is something that I had speculated on certainly in several shows in the past. This is something that OSINT specialists have done. I saw a really cool video series on YouTube from an OSINT specialist whose job it was to like, okay, here's a picture. Where in the world is this picture? And they broke down how they figured that out. And it's actually pretty darn cool. But this tool basically now takes all of that, experience and know-how and puts it into an automated tool that just lets you click on a photo and say, where is that? And by looking at, think about it. It's doing what this person would do when investigating this. It's like a puzzle, right? What time of day is it? Which way are the shadows going? Do I see signs, street signs, business signs in the background? What kind of vegetation is there? Because certain plants are only in certain parts of the world. Is the background really dusty and sandy, or is it lush and verdant? What kind of cars are in the picture? What do their license plates look like? Is there somebody walking by with a t-shirt? What pop culture reference or whatever is on that t-shirt, or business name is on that t-shirt? There's a lot of things you can do that, quickly narrows down where that could be. But then you start looking at what buildings are in there, and then you can combine that with existing things like Google Maps, which has street views of many cities around the world. And if you can start comparing those, you can quickly see that, oh, that building is that building. And not only is that building, but it's from this angle, which means if I'm seeing that building from this angle and about this far away, then the person taking the picture must have been located here. A human could do that, and it's intensive work to be done. All of that now has been put into this AI tool that will do it with a click of a button. Which means now that any picture you post, or crucially, have already posted, could be subject to this sort of location search. And look, even if this company, GeoSpy, even if they do everything right, whatever that even means here, if they do the right thing here and do it properly, even if they only make this available to law enforcement with a warrant or whatever, there's going to be 3 other companies popping up in the next year that won't do that. This data is out there. This technology and these techniques are already available. This guy put this together quickly with existing public data sources. So it's just a matter of time. This is coming. Assume this is going to happen, and assume it's going to be in the hands of somebody who is not a law enforcement officer or investigator with a valid court warrant. So all of us now are going to have to be thinking about this when we post our photos online or share them via text or email or whatever, not just for yourself, but for anyone else who is also in that picture. So there you have it. Be aware. All right, next up, another kind of longish article, and this is about flaws in Subaru's online security portal that let them track millions of cars, and this is from Wired. About a year ago, security researcher Sam Curry bought his mother a Subaru on the condition that at some point in the future, she let him hack it. It took Curry until last November, when he was home for Thanksgiving, to begin examining the 2023 Impreza's internet-connected features and start looking for ways to exploit them. Sure enough, he and a researcher working with him online, Shubham Shah, soon discovered vulnerabilities in the Subaru web portal that let them hijack the ability to unlock the car, honk its horn, and start its ignition, reassigning control of those features to any phone or computer they chose. Most disturbingly for Curry, though, was that they found they could also track the Subaru's location, not merely where it was at the moment, but also where it had been for the entire year that his mother had owned it. The map of the car's whereabouts was so accurate and detailed, Curry says, that he was able to see her doctor visits, the homes of the friends she visited, even which exact parking space his mother parked in every time she went to church. And this is a quote from Curry, quote, "You can retrieve at least a year's worth of location history for the car where it's pinged precisely, sometimes multiple times a day. Whether somebody's been cheating on their wife or getting an abortion or part of some political group, there are a million scenarios where you could weaponize this against someone," unquote. Curry and Shaw today revealed in a blog post their method for hacking and tracking millions of Subarus, which they believe would have allowed hackers to target any of the company's vehicles equipped with its digital features known as Starlink in the US, Canada, or Japan. And that is an unfortunate collision with Elon Musk's satellite-based internet service. It's different. If you're familiar with OnStar, which is like the GM version of this, that's what this Starlink is. Vulnerabilities they found in a Subaru website intended for the company's staff allowed them to hijack an employee's account to both reassign control of the car's Starlink features and also access all the vehicle location data available to employees, including the car's location every time its engine started, as shown in their video below, which of course is in the article if you care to look it up. Curry and Shaw reported their findings to Subaru in late November, and Subaru quickly patched its Starlink security flaws. But the researchers warned that Subaru web vulnerabilities are just the latest in a long series of similar web-based flaws they and other security researchers working with them have found that have affected well over a dozen car makers, including Acura, Genesis, Honda, Hyundai, Infiniti, Kia, Toyota, and many others. There's little doubt, they say, that similarly serious hackable bugs exist in other auto companies' web tools that have yet to be discovered. In Subaru's case in particular, they also point out that their discovery hints at how pervasively those with access to Subaru's portal can track its customers' movements, a privacy issue that will last far longer than the web vulnerabilities that exposed it. Another quote from Curry, quote, "The thing is, even though this is patched, this functionality is still going to exist for Subaru employees. It's just normal functionality that an employee can pull up a year's worth of your location history," unquote. When Wired reached out to Subaru for comment on Curry and Shaw's findings, a spokesperson responded in a statement that, quote, "After being notified by independent security researchers, Subaru discovered a vulnerability in its Starlink service that could potentially allow a third party to access Starlink accounts. The vulnerability was immediately closed and no customer information was ever accessed without authorization," unquote. The Subaru spokesman also confirmed to Wired that, quote, "There are employees of Subaru of America based on their job relevancy who can access location data," unquote. The company offered as an example that employees have that access to share a vehicle's location with first responders in the case when a collision is detected. Quote, "All of these individuals receive proper training and are required to sign appropriate privacy, security, and NDA agreements as needed. These systems have security monitoring solutions in place, which are continually evolving to meet modern cyber threats," unquote. Responding to Subaru's example of notifying first responders about a collision, Curry notes that would hardly require a year's worth of location history. The company didn't respond to Wired asking how far back it keeps customers' location histories and makes them available to employees. All right, now I'm going to skip a little bit here where they get into some of the details about how they did this, but basically they were able to get into this Starlink staff portal that allowed them to access the car's functions. And it goes on to say, in seconds, they could then reassign control of the Starlink features of that user's vehicle, including the ability to remotely unlock the car, honk its horn, start its ignition, or locate it, as shown in the video below. Again, you have to look at the article. Those vulnerabilities alone for drivers present serious theft and safety risks. Curry and Shaw point out that a hacker could have targeted a victim for stalking or theft, looking up someone's vehicle location, then unlocked their car at any time. Though a thief would have to somehow also use a separate technique to disable the car's immobilizer, the component that prevents it from being driven away without a key. The two researchers' work contributes to a growing sense of concern over the enormous amount of location data that car companies collect. Anyway, it goes on, and we're kind of running along, so let me just stop there. Cars are a privacy nightmare. We need to fix this problem. It needs to be shouted from the hilltops, as far as I'm concerned. Government needs to get involved because right now they're all bad. There's no market solution to this. They're all doing it. So there is no car you could buy, modern car, new car, that doesn't have this problem. And again, it's not just a privacy thing, it's a security thing. These companies need to be audited somehow, or at least held financially responsible for these sorts of problems, because until there's consequences, they're not going to spend the money to fix them proactively. Okay, moving on. All right, there's a few articles left, but I'm going to kind of go into speed round mode here because we're running out of time. This is from the Hacker News, and it's called Ransacked, R-A-N-sacked. And it's about some researchers who figured out how to basically bring down cellular systems. A group of academics has disclosed details over 100 security vulnerabilities impacting LTE and 5G implementations that could be exploited by an attacker to disrupt access to service and even gain a foothold into the cellular core network. The findings have been detailed in a study titled Ransacked, a domain-informed approach for fuzzing LTE and 5G RAN core interfaces. And RAN stands for Radio Access Network. And they said, quote, every one of these more than 100 vulnerabilities discussed below can be used to persistently disrupt all cellular communications, phone calls, messaging, and data at a city-wide level. An attacker can continuously crash the Mobile Management Entity, MEE, or Access and Mobility Management Function, AMF, in an LTE 5G network, respectively, simply by sending a single small data packet over the network as an unauthorized user, no SIM card required, unquote. The discovery is the result of a fuzzing exercise dubbed Ransacked, undertaken by researchers against radio access network, or RAN, core interfaces that are capable of receiving input directly from mobile handsets and base stations. The researchers said several of the identified vulnerabilities relate to buffer overflows and memory corruption errors that could be weaponized to breach the cellular core network and leverage that access to monitor cell phone location and connection information for all subscribers on a citywide level, carry out targeted attacks on specific subscribers, and perform further malicious actions on the network itself. What's more, the identified flaws fall under two broad categories: those that can be exploited by an unauthorized mobile device and those that can be weaponized by an adversary who has a compromised base station, sometimes called a femtocell. And these are like basically private little mini cell towers you can get for your house that hook up to the internet. And they say, finally, quote, the introduction of home-use femtocells, followed by more easily accessible G-node bead base stations and 5G deployments, represent a further shift in security dynamics, where once physically locked down, RAN equipment is now openly exposed to physical adversarial threats. Our work explores the implications of this final area by enabling performant fuzzing interfaces that have historically been assumed implicitly secure but now face imminent threats, unquote. All right, so real quick, the main thing I want to point out here is, yes, this is good research. Fuzzing. What is fuzzing? So all of these radio interfaces have APIs and protocols that they use. And because they're wireless, they're technically available to anybody else who has a radio that can talk to them. And just like web APIs and other interfaces on the internet, they have things they expect, like send me these parameters and this type of request, and I will give you this response. These fuzzing techniques automatically throw a whole bunch of junk. It's like throwing spaghetti at the wall. These guys automatically send, if it's asking for me for a name, it'll send them in the name field something that contains crazy random characters that would not normally be in a name. If they say, give me a password that's 20 characters long, it gives them passwords that are 100 characters long, and 99 characters, and 101 characters. These fuzzing tools are automated, and so they basically try all these different possibilities, trying to break these interfaces. And these guys figured out pretty quickly that with just some basic fuzzing tools and sending a lot of crap at these interfaces, that they were able to get them to fail. And so at the base level, that means that they can go into a city potentially and set up these broadcasters that broadcast all this crap, this particularly the crap they know caused failures, and bring down the system. But as any hacker knows, that's just step one. If you get to the point where I can send bad input to your interface and cause it to fail, then I can study it further sometimes and tweak that technique to not only get it to fail, but get it to fail in a way that allows me to access your system. And then all bets are off. So anyway, that's why I read this article, to help you understand what fuzzing is and how attackers use fuzzing and these sorts of techniques to take down and potentially compromise any system. In this case, modern cellular systems. Okay, I have 3 more articles I was going to read, and we just won't have the time. So let me give you some brief highlights, because if I go through the details, I don't think it's going to matter that much. And you can go to the show notes and read the articles if you wish. So first of all, Texas has sued Allstate, the insurance company, for collecting driver data and using that data against them, in some cases, to raise their insurance premiums. So yay, Texas, go after these guys. That's a bad thing. And hopefully this will cause some changes to occur. Again, cars are just privacy nightmares. And backing that up is the next story I was going to read, which is from TechCrunch about GM being banned from sharing driving and location data with insurance companies. This is something that the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, was looking into. They have now published this order. It's out for comment and needs to be approved by a court. And by the way, when this was exposed, GM said that it was going to stop doing this anyway. But again, a lot of this came from the article from Kashmir Hill from the New York Times, who blew the story wide open. We've known about it, and you've known about it for a while because we've talked about this for many years now, actually, on this podcast. But it finally got national attention, and when it did, we started seeing that this has actual impacts beyond privacy. It hits people's pocketbooks when these car companies sell this data to insurance companies, who then turn around and raise people's rates or deny them insurance. So again, that's a good thing. It may not, still got a couple hurdles to go through before it's final, but that is a good thing. And then finally, Consumer Reports has this really long article that I was going to read about what your exercise bike knows about you. But it really should be no surprise that exercise equipment, which, they want you to hook up to your smartwatch or hook up to your phone or install their app, and your device probably itself is an IoT device. It's probably connected to the internet. They are gathering a lot of information about you. Some of that is, for your benefit. They're trying to track your health, trying to track your trends and statistics and, help you reach your goals and give you, all sorts of feedbacks and telematics and analytics and whatever for your own personal use. That's great. Turns out, shockingly, these companies are also taking that data in some cases and selling it on to other people for other purposes and monetizing your data, including tracking things like pregnancy and your weight and other things too, which again, you could just imagine at some point that falling into the hands of your health provider, for example, or maybe, potentially raising your health insurance rates or, just breaching your privacy, right? I mean, when you're working out on your Peloton, you're not assuming that that data is going to go anywhere besides you. Anyway, it's a really long article that I would have loved to have read, but we are long today. So just going to give you that sketch. If you want the full-blown article, check out the Consumer Reports article in the show notes. One final article, and because it's good news and it's not that long, I want to read it completely. And this is from the EFF, and it says, "Victory! Federal court finally rules backdoor searches of 702 data is unconstitutional." Better late than never. Last night, a federal district court held that backdoor searches of databases full of Americans' private communications collected under Section 702 ordinarily require a warrant. The landmark ruling comes in a criminal case, United States versus Haspa Jamri. After more than a decade of litigation and over 4 years since the Second Circuit Court of Appeals found that backdoor searches constitute, quote, separate Fourth Amendment events, unquote, and directed the district court to determine a warrant was required. Now that has been officially decreed. In the intervening years, Congress has reauthorized Section 702 multiple times, each time ignoring overwhelming evidence that the FBI and the intelligence community abuse their access to databases of warrantlessly collected messages and other data. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, or FISC, which Congress assigned with the primary role of judicial oversight of Section 702, has also repeatedly dismissed arguments that the backdoor searches violate the Fourth Amendment, giving the intelligence community endless do-overs despite its repeated transgressions of even lax safeguards on these searches. This decision sheds light on the government's liberal use of what is essentially a finders keepers rule regarding your communication data. As a legal authority, FISA Section 702 allows the intelligence community to collect a massive amount of communications data from overseas in the name of national security. But in cases where one side of that conversation is a person on the U.S. soil, that data is still collected and retained in large databases searchable by federal law enforcement. Because the U.S. side of these communications is already collected and just sitting there, the government has claimed that law enforcement agencies do not need a warrant to sift through them. EFF argued for over a decade that this is unconstitutional, and now a federal court agrees with us. The district court found that regardless of whether the government can lawfully, warrantlessly collect communications between foreigners and Americans using Section 702, it cannot ordinarily rely on foreign intelligence exception to the Fourth Amendment's warrant clause when searching these communications, as in the FBI's routine practice. And even if such an exception did apply, the court found that the intrusion on privacy caused by reading our most sensitive communications rendered these searches unreasonable under the meaning of the Fourth Amendment. In 2021 alone, the FBI conducted 3.4 million warrantless searches of U.S. persons' 702 data. In light of this ruling, we ask Congress to uphold its responsibility to protect civil rights and civil liberties by refusing to renew Section 702 absent a number of necessary reforms, including an official warrant requirement for querying U.S. persons' data and increased transparency. On April 15, 2026, Section 702 is set to expire. We expect any lawmaker worthy of that title to listen to what this federal court is saying and create a legislative warrant requirement so that the intelligence community does not continue to trample on the constitutionally protected rights to private communications. More immediately, the FISC should amend its rules for backdoor searches and require the FBI to seek a warrant before conducting them. So, not a lot to add to that. As this article says, this has been a long time coming. Section 702 and all that stuff, I believe, came about after 9/11, and we just kept renewing it. And even though it had this sunset clause that forced Congress to reauthorize it before it could continue, they've basically rubber stamped it many times. We came really close to getting some good reforms to that law before it got renewed last April. I think, literally watching C-SPAN as the votes were happening on this, and we lost by a very narrow margin. It was very disappointing. So we will have to try again next year. And again, like this EFF article says, the FISC, there's no reason for it to wait for the reauthorization to confront this. They should take this ruling and say, okay, from now on, if you want to search that information, you need a warrant on American citizens. All right, so with that, let's quickly get to my tip of the week. And again, as usual, there's a long article you can read with the full information on my blog at firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. There is, of course, a link to this in the show notes. But after some recent news articles and, just a preponderance of evidence supporting this, I wanted to make sure that people understood what was really going on with browser extensions. And this is honestly true of just about any application that allows for extensions. Browsers are a big one. This is pretty commonplace on modern web browsers today, but it's also true of a lot of big-time applications. Basically, these application software developers say, we've got a really powerful tool here that can do some really cool stuff, but we don't have time or the energy or the money or the bandwidth or the people or whatever to develop all these really cool ideas we have for this. And there's a lot of great ideas that people have out there that keep asking us for these things. So tell you what, why don't we make it possible for other people to plug in, to extend, to add on to our software? We'll create a formal interface that allows this, where third parties can write plugins, extensions, add-ons to our software that allow it to do cool new things. And, sometimes browsers will eventually incorporate those functionalities directly, like, okay, that's so cool and so useful, we will actually bring that into the base application. And that's happened with lots of things, like pop-up blockers, for example. And with some browsers, privacy tools like anti-tracking and whatnot. But basically what that means is these plugins or extensions or add-ons, they all have different names. So depending on which browser you're using, they call them different things. They're all synonyms in this case. What these extensions do, though, is it adds software. It adds powerful software. It adds software to the browser that in many cases can do whatever the browser itself could do. And we don't think about this maybe, but we should, especially if you're using a browser like Google's Chrome. But that browser can see everything you're doing. It can see every web page you go to. It can see everything on the web pages you go to. It can read your mail if you're using a web-based browser. It can see your passwords. It can see your usernames and email addresses. The browser can see everything. Now, we trust that browser not to do anything with that information, but it could theoretically do that. And so that's why we need to carefully consider what web browser we trust to use on a daily basis. And that's why I tell everybody not to use Google Chrome. But plugins for that browser should get the same basic level of scrutiny, and we should only ever install plugins that we absolutely need to install and from sources that we absolutely trust. And we need to keep up with the sources because sometimes the sources change. The owner of that plugin gets tired of doing it and wants to give up. It's a free plugin. It's thankless. They've done what they did and they're not having fun anymore. So they turn that over to somebody else who's more than happy to take it and add cool new features, including things like tracking and monetizing your data, things that the original owner of that extension didn't do. So we really, really need to be careful what we install in these plugin interfaces, these extensions for our web browsers. Personally, I have like 3: Privacy Badger, uBlock Origin, and Bitwarden. Now, I'm fudging a little bit because there's a couple that I use infrequently that I leave disabled. And I only enable them when I absolutely need them, and then I turn back off. Because I'm just trying to reduce my attack surface. These browser plugins, while they do have a permission structure, kind of like apps on your phone, when you install them, and in some cases on some browsers after the fact, you can tweak what those plugins are allowed to access and allowed to change. For example, maybe you want a browser that can look at your web page but not alter its contents, for example. There are permissions for these, but they're pretty coarse-grained right now. And you don't have nearly as much control over these as you do over some other applications and what permissions we give them. Permissions is a new thing, right? This is something we've been adding to operating systems and applications over the last few years as we've basically got into this trust no one mentality of, I want to know what every app I install is up to. And yeah, I want fine-grained granularity over whether this app can access my contacts or access my photos or access my history or whatever. Same thing is true with plugins. I want you to think of plugins and extensions for your web browser like applications. They're kind of like apps for your browser. So with that, I want you to find in your web browser right now where the extensions are located. There might be a tools menu. If there's a help menu with a search option, you could search for add-ons or extensions or plugins. Each browser has a different name for them. In fact, I've seen some browsers refer to them by multiple things. So find out where those are, review what extensions you have installed. You may have forgotten that you installed one, or you may have accidentally installed one at some point. Review what is in there. If you drill down into them from that interface, in a lot of cases, you can see what permissions they have. You can see who the owner is. You can find a privacy policy with them in a lot of cases. Take the time now to review those browser extensions and then redecide which ones you want to leave. And if possible, in some cases, in some browsers, you can actually, after the fact, tweak the permissions of those extensions. If you find that you can't tweak the permissions and you want to tweak them, like you want to have this extension, but you forgot why at some point you gave them access to your photos and now you don't want them to have that, but you want to keep the extension for other reasons. One way you might be able to get around that, you might try uninstalling the extension and reinstalling it. Sometimes these permissions are only, your ability to tweak them is only given to you at the time of install. That's one thing you might try. But if nothing else, just at least be aware of what you have installed, what permissions they have, what their privacy policies are, and decide which ones you want to keep. And again, most of browsers have a way to enable or disable ones instead of uninstalling. If it's something you use infrequently, then maybe you could just disable it and then go back and enable it on the few times when you actually want it. All right, that's it. That's your tip of the week. There's more info and a lot more links to related info in my article on this if you want to check it out. Again, firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com, or find the link under the tip of the week in the show notes. So there you have it, your news and your tip of the week. All right, that's going to do it for this week. I'm already running along, so I'm going to keep this short. Again, thank you to everybody who answered the annual listener survey. I really do take that to heart. I read every single one of them. I can't promise to honor everybody's requests. Obviously, there are some mutually exclusive requests. I want more news or I want more interviews. I can't do both. Anyway, it turns out, by the way, spoiler, that one of the questions I asked was, do you like the balance between news and interviews? And almost everybody said that they like the current balance. So that's great. But as an example, that's the kind of questions that I'm asking on these things. So anyway, it's a great time to give feedback. Unfortunately, it's cut off for this year. If you have any burning feedback, you could always send me feedback at any time by shooting an email to feedback@firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. But once a year, I also do this extensive listener survey where I ask for your feedback. And I really do appreciate the people who took the time to do that. And the people who gave me an email address perhaps won a free copy of my book. All right, we got a lot of great interviews coming up. I'm not going to tip all of them now, but I will be talking with Yael Grauer. She's amazing. She's done some really good work with Consumer Reports and as a journalist. I'll be talking with her soon. I met Weld Pond at ShmooCon, and he has agreed to come on the show. We'll be talking with Chris Wysopal soon. Michael Lee has a really cool tool called Claw Your Data Back, or CYD, CYD, for helping you to manage and potentially delete your Twitter account. And he's also working on expanding that tool for other social media. I want to talk to him about that and why we need tools like that. So Mike is going to be coming on soon to talk about that. I'll be talking with the data diva soon, Debbie Reynolds. I was on her show. Actually, I was recorded for her show some time ago, and that will be airing in March. But, she's going to come on my show too, and we're going to have a fun talk about IoT and security and privacy. And next week, we'll be talking with Dr. Paul Ashley, who is the CTO of Anonymity Labs, the company that has the MySudo service. And I've got some other great interviews in the pipeline. So you don't want to miss any of that. Subscribe now, and then you won't. Please tell your friends and family as well. Share this up on social media. There's a lot of great content coming up. And there's a lot of great content they can go back and consume. I mean, I've been doing this almost 8 years now. So lots of great stuff coming up. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next week, as always, don't get caught with your drawbridge down.